Fitness ist beim Endurofahren nicht unpraktisch.
Schon wieder! Aber sie startet gerade nicht. Ist schon wild. Mega, ich habe mir gedacht, die schwierigen Sachen haben wir hinter uns gelassen. Sehr sinnvoll.
These days, even the lightweight touring enduro bikes are already pretty big ships, at least if you come from the off-road corner. But we want to find out how big the real difference is between a touring enduro and a dual sport motorcycle like the Gas ES700 up there. Schaaf is hanging on up there on that tough section. He needs a second try, and now it's my turn with the Tenere. Let's see how I get on with it. If you've been bitten by the off-road bug, but you also like to travel like we do, then you're faced with quite a dilemma. All the modern touring enduro bikes may be great, comfortable, practical and sporty to top it all off, but only on the road. Because as soon as it gets rough, every kilogram seems to double, and the heavy adventure bikes become an unmovable iron block. So it's not surprising that many commenters have been calling for years for manufacturers to finally build a touring enduro with a maximum weight of 160 to 180 kilograms. So far, however, these wishes have gone unheard. Hello and welcome to a new video on 1000 PS TV. Schaaf behind the camera and I, McGregor, in front of the camera make a fool of themselves off-road. It has to be said, of course, that it's not the bikes that set the limits here. Masters like Poltaris and co show in many videos that the bikes can do much more than you would actually give them credit for. So we didn't come here to test them, but rather to test and explore our own limits.
Oh, es ist zart.
And that's what we're all about though. We want to show how big the difference really is between dual sport motorcycles and touring enduros in off-road use for the average rider. And we have brought these machines with us. On one side is the Gas ES700 Enduro, and on the other my Yamaha Tenere 700. And the interesting thing is, although they represent two different types of motorcycles, and yes, I say represent on purpose, because it's not so much a comparison of these two specific motorcycles, but more of a general comparison. And the Gas is now simply symbolic of the dual sport bikes and the Tenere for the touring enduro bikes, because after all, it is perhaps with the Aprilia Touareg 1660, the lightest bike on the market for touring enduro bikes that can also be ridden off-road properly. It is interesting that although they are different, they are very similar in some respects, especially in terms of performance. The displacements are similar: 693 cubic centimeters single cylinder, 689 cubic centimeters pure two-cylinder, 74 horsepower, 73.4 horsepower at 9,000 revolutions per minute, 77.5 Newton meters at 6,500 revolutions. And here we have 68 Newton meters at 6,500 revolutions. So you see, very close to each other. Of course, if you then look at the periphery, that's where the differences come to light. The weight alone. And that's what I say will make the biggest difference. But who knows? The video will show that. We weighed the Gas on the 1000 PS scale with a full tank of 160 kilograms, and a standard Tenere comes to 205 kilograms with a full tank. But my Tenere is no longer standard, as you can see. I have such small engine guards, more robust hand guards, a few little extras here and there, a Zard exhaust. All in all, that means not forgetting the main stands, which of course adds a bit to the weight. So I guess it will weigh around 210, 215 kilograms when fully fueled. So we're already at a good 50 kilograms difference. Another difference is in the suspension. Niels has already had Erland's parts fitted because this was Niels's own bike. So the Tenere here is a bit more powerful in terms of suspension than the standard machine. A good match, I think, because here we have a WP Explore suspension with 250 millimeters of travel. In other words, significantly more reserves than in a standard Tenere. So they are a little more on a level playing field here. Apart from that, the biggest difference is in the electronics. The Tenere 700 is known as a purist. We have original ABS, but here, for example, we also have two riding modes. In mode 1, road mode, even cornering ABS and lean angle dependent traction control are active. In mode 2, off-road mode, these systems are adapted for off-road use. Let's take a look at how this works and how well it works in real-life use. Off-road enthusiasts know that it's really difficult to drive off-road properly here in Central Europe, so we thought we'd head south. More precisely, to the south of Slovenia. We don't want to reveal the exact routes here because whenever you post such insider tips on the internet, hordes of off-road cracks follow shortly afterwards. I'll tell you this much, in the unpopulated wooded south of Slovenia on the border to Croatia, there are still lots of roads with unpaved surfaces that can be ridden on without any problems as long as you show some common sense and behave yourself. Over 30 years ago, my father met my mother here in these forests on a motorcycle tour. And since then, he has also been exploring the area on enduro hikes and therefore knows his way around very well. He will act as our guide over the next few days and lead us on beautiful detours from the area of the Slovenian snow mountain to the Croatian coast in the Bay of Kvarn. Along the way, beautiful forest paths, old military roads and a few challenging climbs and downhills await us. After all, there's no need to worry that we're close to Croatia and that this won't be a casual Sunday ride. One thing at a time, let's go!
Und wie ist für dich das am leichten Bock?
Das ist gut gegangen jetzt, ja.
Ich habe schon gekämpft, ehrlich gesagt.
Aufgehalten hast du mich.
Ich war, ja.
Du brauchst nicht um einen heißen Brei herumreden. Ich sag's wie es ist, du hast mich aufgehalten.
Wir tauschen dann und dann schauen wir weiter.
Sagt das gleich, ich habe euch aufgehalten. Kannst du filmen, dass sie ausschauen mit viel Haar?
Leider nein. You're not allowed to do that toasting in Austria.
We are in Slovenia.
Yeah, right. It's a bullshit rule anyway, come on.
I've been challenged by that anyway. The first bit, that was the warm-up piece that Dad, our dear guide, picked out, but there were already a few tough sections anyway, so going uphill on the Tenere is not easy. But then you rode it on the flat and also downhill, and you were really enthusiastic. You've already declared yourself Team Tenere.
I've already outed myself a bit, but I don't know how much that has to do purely with the ride quality of the suspension, because I'm relatively sensitive to that. I also like suspension that responds well, and as soon as a bike has a suspension that responds well, I don't usually care about anything else. So maybe I'm a bit blinded. Yes, it was a good warm-up, so I've learned from the sport that I never do, that it's normal to be really exhausted after a warm-up. So that's nothing new. Two things I've learned for now. I haven't ridden a Tenere for a long time, but it's still the case that this bike gives you incredible confidence for a touring enduro off-road bike, because you stand very well on it. And you have a relatively large amount of freedom of movement. And the second thing is the downside. So the weight difference, you said 50 kilos?
More actually, I guess, because mine is heavier than a standard one.
I would think so too. You can really feel it. You have a lot more to do. And above all, I just felt more insecure in corners with lots of bumps, because you get these hits and there's a lot more weight pulling on your arms basically, or what you have to compensate for, and then I think you have to use more strength, and that's what you feel when you come off the gas. There are huge differences. They are two different worlds.
For me, it was also, even in this easier terrain, although then I didn't find it that easy, but if you switch then from the Tenere to the gas, it's like a bicycle. It is simply unbelievable how precisely you can control this low weight on the steering wheel, but also via the footrests. Even on the easier terrain, you also have a certain amount of confidence in the front wheel, because you can feel that, okay, if I give just a little bit of input, it will react immediately. And that's not the case with the Tenere. You have to really get going. I have the feeling that it is less forgiving of mistakes, because you know that once this weight is in motion, once it's on the track, then it's committed, then you can't get out of it so easily. I also think the ergonomics are really good. It works really well on the Tenere. But still, you feel that it's not so easy to get this mass off a course that might not be ideal and to change course.
Yeah, yes, that's actually the case on the Tenere, especially as a less or not quite so experienced rider. It's a bit like closing your eyes and going for it. It works extremely well. But I'm just curious to see what it's like. First of all, when we ride uphill now, difficult, but especially when you're generally riding a bit slower and with more technique, because then I think it will be a bit of a shaking ride.
Keeping the pace will be difficult. I already have a bit shaky hands, but it'll be fine. I'll get there.
Das ist jetzt quasi wie beim Skifahren, die Streckenbegehung.
Aber halt bergauf.
Aber halt bergauf. Es geht jetzt schon längere Zeit so rauf. Und wir sind jetzt ich meine, die erfahrenen Offroad-Piloten denken sich, ist ja eh nichts. Und keine Frage, mit Kölnern fährt man das auch mit einer Reiseenduro locker. Aber für uns, für mich, auch das ist meine erste Ausfahrt überhaupt mit der Tenere nach der Winterpause. Ich bin auch ein bisschen eingerostet und langsam kriege ich Angst. Da die Linie zu finden zwischen jeder Menge loser Steine und auch so kleiner Felsstufen, Steine im Erdreich drin, das bringt mich langsam an eine Grenze, wo ich mit der Tenere echt Angst habe, dass ich es einfach mörderisch versenke. Deswegen vielleicht kann ich noch ein bisschen aufräumen bei den Ärgsten.
Alter, ist das der Tropfen vom heißen Stein oder was?
Hey, ich brauche ein bisschen was.
Ja, wie wär's damit? Das ist geschissener, glaube ich. Wahnsinn, der pfeift aus dem letzten Loch.
Ich bin schon fitnessmäßig auch ein bisschen am Kämpfen. Aber ja, aufgeben ist keine Devise.
Aufgeben tun wir einen Brief!
Schau mal. Der DKC 80 ist sehr robust.
Warte, zeig, was ist das? Nicht so schnell. Der Gregor, vielleicht hat sich deine Streckenbegehung auch gerade ausgezahlt.
Vielleicht, ja. Das wäre nicht gut gewesen. Wir haben gesagt, wir riskieren es heute. Wir brauchen kein Reifenflickzeug. Wird schon gut gehen.
Bosnien haben wir auch geschafft ohne.
Richtig. Serpentinen haben wir auch noch.
Gregor,
wird spannend.
Ja, ich muss zu deiner Verteidigung jetzt auch dazu sagen, weil ich das ja am Display sehe. Man sieht halt kein bisschen Steigung auf der Kamera.
Es ist immer so.
Wir schauen gerade ein bisschen aus, als ob wir absolut überdramatisieren würden. Leider, die Kamera bringt sich drüber, aber es ist für einen durchschnittlichen Fahrer ist das steil genug.
Ja, es ist nicht extrem, aber steil genug, dass mit so losen großen Brocken immer wieder Ästen etc. die quer liegen. Also für mich reicht's. Ich würde sagen, genug gewandert.
Gib ihm.
Gib ihm.
Gib ihm. Tutto Gas!
it was no problem at all anyway. I went up far too confidently, and our build-up of tension was completely unnecessary. But what off-roader hasn't experienced this? The unexpected often happens. So for now, I can still be happy about the steep climb I've just successfully completed.
Bist du deppert? Oh! Oh! Es lebe der CP2-Motor. Ohne den hätte ich das nie geschafft. Oh.
I turned my Tenere around one last time with great effort, and then let myself onto easier terrain in joyful expectation.
Oh, das war knapp.
Carelessly and lightheartedly down the tricky section.
Ah, shit.
And here I am already falling to the ground.
Fuck. Hoffentlich ist nichts passiert. Wenigstens habe ich das Kamera. Naja. Okay.
With the split second between driving and hitting it, I can only speculate as to what caused it.
Was hat mich erwischt? Der Stein dort, glaube ich. Ja, Motorschutzbügel hat sich schon bewährt. Und die Handguards auch. Gut, fahren wir runter. Die anderen warten. Dann gibt es einen Schadensbericht. Okay. Ich brauche noch ein bisschen. Da kommt er schon.
Ich glaube, du bist da umgefallen.
Ich bin gestürzt.
Aha.
Genau da. Volle Wäsche. Bin eben im Kopf ziemlich eingeschlagen, aber Helm schützt.
Spiegel schon traurig.
Jetzt nicht mehr. Es dürfte nichts groß kaputt sein. Aber sie startet gerade nicht. Ja, der Stein irgendwie so getroffen, dass er sich weggerollt hat und dadurch sofort. Das ging so schnell.
Ja, das ist das Gewicht und die Masse einfach. Ja.
Genau. Schauen wir, dass wir endlich von dem Berg runterkommen. Ich freue mich wieder auf offene Flächen, auf die Prärie.
Ist da angeschossen, ne?
Ja, sie ist kopfüber gelegen, weil sie ist so ein bisschen mit dem Tank Richtung
Und wie hast du das aufgebracht?
gehoben.
Schwer, gell?
Ja, ist schwer. Ist richtig schwer. Na komm.
Ich weiß nicht, willst du das probieren anzurennen? Du musst nur ein bisschen auf Schwung kommen, ein bisschen ruhig lassen und jetzt kannst du.
Na komm. Ich will nicht so wirklich. Ich bin gestürzt.
Ja, ich hab's mir gedacht leider. Aber er hat's mitgefilmt.
Immerhin.
Alles auf Band.
Und die Frechheit war, dass du komplett souverän raufgefahren bist. Das war wertlos.
Ja, aber wenn du das zusammenschnitzt, dann passt's wieder.
Es kommt. Sie kommt fast. Ich muss anlaufen probieren. Ja, das gibt's ja nicht. Kurve will ich mal mit Motor fahren. Oh. Oh. Weiter. Komm schon, komm schon. Das will nicht. Aber will
Du,
nicht.
ich zeig dir was. Ich mag so. Erste,
Erste.
zweite, dritte. Und jetzt, schau, so.
Die kommt eh fast. Es ist so schwer, sich darauf auch noch zu konzentrieren, während da 1000 fette Steine im Weg liegen.
Ja, aber es hilft nichts. Wir müssen es irgendwie in Gang bringen.
Vielleicht brauche ich einfach mehr Schwung. Alter, fast. Also, warum? Jetzt kommt jetzt Sorge. Okay, jetzt kommt. Oh. Warum will ich kein Gas nehmen? Will aber nicht. Schade. Vielleicht aber Zündung aus. Zündung an. War es ernsthaft das? Wie beim Callcenter. Zündung an, Zündung aus und sofort ist gegangen. Okay. Aber gewusst, japanische Technik. Lässt mich nicht im Stich.
An overdose of adrenaline must have permanently impaired my ability to think. The obligatory ignition off, ignition on game is actually a well-known standard safety feature, even for me. But fine. I've processed the first shock, but only knowing that I can...
Which one? The one from the disgraceful incident with the gas, because that was well.
That was just a dumb thing to say. I mean, the Tenere was a stupid thing too, but you saw it. It happened so quickly. So at least that's what I imagine. I mean, I could have chosen the riding line better, no question, but I still think it was relatively out of my control. The thing with the throttle that you tip over a bit when maneuvering.
Yes, but that's important because I can defend you there, because I know for a fact that you did it on purpose, because you can't make a mistake like that. So people will see that it's an act. But that brings me to the point. We are now discussing driving in more demanding terrain. Please, dear keyboard warriors, calm down. And this is challenging terrain for us. We know that there are some really, really, really great riders out there. Just let us know in the comments. So difficult terrain, falling over. First benefit you were allowed to feel, pick up 50 kilos. So pick up 50 kilos less.
But that went surprisingly well. So, you know, Tenere is on everyone's mind actually. And there are also a lot of videos that have really criticized her for being so top heavy, because she is, no question. And the fact that it is also quite high, flat, slim, it falls very flat, and that it is insanely heavy to lift. Some say not really possible, but I'm not even 80 kilos, I'm a really untrained lump. And accordingly, the ratio of body weight to bike weight is very unfavorable. And it was even slightly downhill with the tank, so the wheels were slightly higher than the tank, and I still managed it. And I think you just need a bit of technique on a more or less safe stand. So if it had been slippery or muddy, it would have looked very different. But let me tell you, I checked it myself. It's quite possible, even if you're not the Hulk.
Nevertheless, the gas is much easier to lift.
Yeah, over 50 kilos is over 50 kilos. You can't sugarcoat that in any case.
Well, because I am a slim guy, I actually thought that the gas was actually too heavy for me. But then I saw you and we're both rather slim. And then I thought to myself, okay, well, it can't be that hard.
Yes, but luckily we weren't just lying on the ground. We also drove. And how was that? Let's start with that. I'll just start with what happened first. The uphill part. No nonsense. We went downhill first. On the difficult part. Right. How was it for you? You once said that you were enthusiastic about the electronics on the gas. The thing is, when you switch to dual mode, the ABS adapts. It no longer depends on the lean angle. Deactivated at the rear, and at the front we have a very, very late regulating off-road ABS. And at some point you stopped and expressed your enthusiasm.
Yes, that's right, but I also have to say that I have a bit of a bad feeling about it, because if there's one thing I know or have learned about enduro riding, it's that it's extremely important to be in control when you're riding enduro. So I've heard a saying that there are 1,000 different brake pressures and you have to make very, very fine adjustments. And the gas has an incredibly original character, a relatively well-functioning off-road ABS. In other words, you can really, as soon as you, well, I wasn't even sure at first whether it was on or off, but then I noticed a pulsation on the lever and thought to myself, look, I think it's working. And then you can really say, Jesus, take the wheel and let gas do it. It works very, very well as long as you're not going too fast, you might say, because I have the impression that you brake even more effectively, even better manually with short form locking actually. Also for what we were riding and how we were riding it, so I'll say with a bit of speed but still relaxed, you can really, in my case, because I did it, blindly rely on it. And at the same time, of course, the ergonomics when riding downhill. The fact that you have a lot of freedom of movement, not a wide seat, means that you can move extremely well with your legs backwards, with your upper body further forward, so that the front wheel has pressure. So the gas worked very well for me downhill.
Yes, ergonomics is a good keyword, but first of all, ABS. This can also be completely deactivated. So I think I still see advantages there, because when you're perhaps already tired.
Gregor, Lektion 1, Fitness.
Fitness ist beim Endurofahren nicht unpraktisch, würde ich meinen.
Ich mache das einfach mit eleganter Technik wett heute.
I was actually exhausted. My crash was probably due to tiredness because I drove up and down the difficult section 6 times for the camera. I was just exhausted. And especially when you've already had a long day, yeah, I think it's great that there's a feature like this where, as you say, Jesus takes the wheel, just switch off your head at least a little. You can concentrate on other things, not so much driving line selection in the front, because as we've already said, we're testing for average drivers.
But if you want to improve your skills, simply deactivate it. You can also clip it in really well when things get a bit rougher and the engine is thrown around so that you don't lose contact or lose your balance. You can clip them in beautifully and have plenty of movement forwards and backwards. But handlebars. The handlebars are already very low on the gas. It's just typical of the hard enduro. And that's also an advantage when riding sportily uphill, because you can really get a good grip on the front wheel. But downhill you do have a little hump, especially if you're a bit taller. You're really crooked. You have to pull your head back in the crunch, and this passage that we rode down there, a bit of this more challenging terrain, that was quite long. So fitness comes into play again, of course. I really felt that. And meanwhile, I was looking at you on the Tenere in front of me. You're in a much more relaxed position on long downhill rides.
So you've now said that it's a benefit, the low handlebars, when riding uphill, because you can get much more forward. That's true. But from my point of view, as an averagely talented off-road rider, it was more of a downside. For me, it's exactly the opposite. I got along relatively well with the throttle downhill because I have a crooked back by nature, because I'm a Quasimodo, and because I'm a hunchback at 1,000 PS. So I can do it very well. That means it worked very well for me uphill. And that's where I generally come to a point that riding in challenging terrain and uphill, the geometry is different. Because you say it's low handlebars, that's basically like enduro. That means you can put an incredible amount of weight on the front, which you need in really difficult terrain. Otherwise, if you don't have a lot of weight on the front, you don't have enough pressure on the front. Everything we rode, even the demanding ones, you could theoretically ride sitting down. So in theory, you could ride sitting the whole time. And that's why, for me as a street biker, which I actually am, it feels so wrong to steer myself so far forward over the front wheel that I simply have an overcoming problem, which means I can't really overcome myself, and above all, I can't get over it. Especially uphill, I can feel it, and it was much easier on the Tenere because the handlebars are much higher, and there I am already in the position where I am in balance, where I don't pull on the handlebars, and that actually worked better for me than on the gas. I can feel this more extreme position when we're riding a bit slower and more technical on the flats. And then I have a bit more confidence, so I can actually feel this benefit. but it's funny how you should actually always feel it, but the reality for an average rider is different, so I have to get better at that.
This challenging terrain, which also has a lot of loose, big stones, so you really had to find your line, your track, and there were definitely places where you had a lot of problems if you didn't take the good part of the track. I think that was one of the biggest differences between the two bikes. Just the weight comes into play, how much easier these course changes are with the throttle. It's enough to just push in on 1 foot peg and it makes the turn, and you can beautifully avoid these rough stones, small rock edges, and so on and on the Tenere. It's just really like that. It profits incredibly. First of all, I think the CP2 engine is much more difficult, and I can imagine that with other touring enduros, because not all of them have such an extremely high torque engine that pushes up so cleanly from the lowest revs like a tractor that you almost can't stall. And that's a huge advantage if you imagine I had a bit of a sporty engine or focus more on the medium rev range, then the CP2 is always much heavier, and of course the Öhlins suspension, that was also a difference. Namely that it works more finely than the WP Explorer suspension in the KTM, but you still have to go back to the choice of line. You just have to ride with more foresight. You don't just have to decide earlier on a track, and then you no longer have the option of making quick corrections at the last moment, just as it were.
Right, but of course you need a lot more power on the Tenere, and it's difficult to make a movement with a lot of power and sensitivity at the same time. That means on the Tenere you have to act a bit like a berserker on the handlebars and be determined. We know that this is possible, but it takes time to get there, because that was also the biggest issue for me in difficult terrain. The precision with which you can move the throttle because it weighs so little and because you're nicely over the front wheel that you have full control. That was the biggest difference in terms of handling. Because you mentioned the engine, I also noticed one thing about the throttle. It's a bit irritating for me because it feels exactly like a hard enduro in terms of position. Because you mentioned the engine, I also noticed one thing about the throttle. It's a bit irritating for me because it feels exactly like a hard enduro in terms of position. At the same time, however, the gear ratio is a bit too long for me, which makes perfect sense on the road because you can ride it super comfortably on the road. But I'm used to it from riding a hard enduro less than 10 times in my life. So I don't really need to use first gear. I ride everything in second gear, even if it's technical, and the throttle ratio is too long for that. Then you have to use first and it's fine, but it would be easier for me if it was shorter geared and I could do it in second where it's a bit less sharp. But that brings me to the second difference I've felt, where I've also gained confidence, is that just as you need a lot of feel on the front brake when riding enduro, you also need a lot of feel on the clutch. Because you're technically riding trial, and so to speak, which is a game of throttle and clutch, you actually use the brake less than the throttle and clutch. The throttle has an incredibly fine hydraulic clutch. I can only ride the hard enduro with one finger. I can't do it any other way, and that's the only way I have enough feeling, and it works on the throttle as well as on a hard enduro. That makes an incredible difference on the Tenere with a cable. I can't do it with one finger. I mean, I don't know my way around technically, but at the same time, I would also like to question a little bit your dear former owner, our boss, if you're already getting everything in there from the bottom to the top, incredibly expensive suspension, and why no hydraulic clutch? I don't know, there's probably a reason for it.
Maybe he drives so much better than us that he just never needs the clutch, or maybe...
Maybe because the threatening finger that always keeps threatening the employees is very muscular, I don't know. But the clutch makes a huge difference.
Even the dosability is already better, but I think there's a difference in terms of effort alone when you drive like this for longer now.
I can't ride that one with one finger.
I always use 2 fingers, but even with 2, I tend to ride a bit more with the Tenere and you with the gas. And I really felt it. I really felt it at the end. After a lot of riding, a lot of clutch operation, the quick shifter only works uphill. But off-road, as you say, you need the clutch almost all the time, especially if you're not the pro who rides with a lot of speed. I really felt it, so that's true. The clutch is definitely much smoother to operate here and simply easier.
What comes to my mind now, before I look at my notes, we talked about electronics at the beginning with the ABS, which I think is a very useful feature. At the same time, gas also had traction control. and I was a bit surprised that it didn't work so well off-road. I'm used to that from the big trips. I've ridden the big GS, Multistrada, Super Adventure, and I've also ridden a bit off-road in my life, and the traction control works in such a way that you can accelerate out of a turn with a drift, so even the biggest fool can do it. And you have the feeling that you're doing it yourself because the electronics intervene so gently, and with the gas you notice it when riding uphill like we did in loose terrain. I think it works even better there because you actually already have permanent traction. But when accelerating out of a bend, especially when it's also about having fun, it sometimes cuts in completely abruptly and takes away any propulsion, which is good. You can't drift over and let the rear wheel overtake you. But I was just amazed that something that comes from the KTM works a bit insensitively, but you said it could be the single cylinder.
Without having any technical knowledge, I can just imagine that because the single cylinder is much rougher and also has more power output, and these phases in the engine run are much bigger and rise and fall like this and that, it is difficult to regulate smoothly because you don't have so many small short periods, but just these longer ones.
That may be the case, and thank God users will certainly tell us that in the comments, but please with fact check, so sources, etc. Otherwise, I don't believe it.
What I also noticed is, firstly, in difficult terrain, especially when you're driving up and down, perhaps as well as what's necessary for the camera, maneuvering. So there's also a huge difference. I've always had a hard time with that one, and with the gas, I only had a hard time when I've completely messed up, and that's because firstly it's very high due to this rally bench, because normally the Tenere is still a bit low. I think the standard seat is 875 millimeters high, but it's now over 900 millimeters. I think 910 or something. I'm not going to commit myself to that. It's high. I'm 1.85 tall, have long legs, and yet as soon as it gets uneven, you can feel that it's not that comfortable. I just tiptoe along, and the gas is also high at 900, I think even 25 millimeters seat height. But it's just the weight, and you really do it without even thinking about it. You put it at an angle and ride at a relative lean. You can move it when you're standing. It's always the same with the Tenere, just don't lean too much, because then the weight might be too much and you won't be able to keep a good grip. So maneuvering, turning around on such small paths, difficult terrain, difficult with the Tenere.
So I've looked at my notes, I'm done so far.
Let me have another look. Well, I think we've really said everything, and if we can think of anything else, then hopefully we'll see each other again. Now the roads are getting easier. I can take a deep breath. And the ocean, we've already seen it. And now it should slowly come closer. What else can I say? Ride on! The rest of the route to Croatia is mostly on harmless gravel passages, but just before the coast it gets spicy again in the forest. Rough, round stones, narrow paths, and the odd rocky edge all reminds me too much of the fall I had not so long ago. Fear quickly sets in, you start to hesitate in front of dangerous looking places, and tense up gripping the handlebars, all things you shouldn't do. Momentum, speed and relaxed riding are your friend in loose terrain, which is twice as important on the heavy touring enduro. I have to remind myself of this again and again. And with the relaxation, the fear disappears and it's fun again.
Fahren ist doch wasserdicht.
Ja, aber es ist offen, weil man heiß ist.
Deswegen hast du das ja an, weil es wasserdicht ist.
Erste Locken oder in der zweiten?
Beide!
Digga, sind die offenen Taschen auch wasserdicht?
Nein,
Nicht?
ich habe jetzt so eine punktierte Dusche gekriegt.
Ja.
Sehr regional.
Ja, aber besser als dein Gestank.
So dann.
Walkers and hikers suddenly appear, signaling that we're approaching the densely populated coast. And in no time at all, we've made it. There are few moments more euphoric and yet deeply relaxing than after a tough and fun Enduro tour.
Deshalb trage ich Orthema-Schutz. Endlich schaut es so aus, als ob ich ordentliche Schultern habe. Endlich! Endlich! Nein, Spaß beiseite. Schön war's.
Danke fürs
Tourguide.
Ja, genau.
Ja.
Unbezahlt. Richtig 1000 PS-Manier.
Ich wollte gerade so machen.
Viel ist eh nicht mitkommen, nicht übrig blieben. Okay. Ich weihe dich auf den Namen Camellia. Oh, es ist fast nichts mehr da. Und die Gasgas, verdient die Gasgas auch einen Namen eigentlich? Ich meine, als Dauertesterin vielleicht. Aber ich bin nicht kreativ genug, mir einen einfallen zu lassen. Ich taufe es jetzt einfach präventiv und in den Kommentaren erfahren wir dann, wie unsere Dauertesterin und Tune-Up Gasgas 700 dann heißt.
Es ist total schön zu wissen, dass es noch Länder gibt, wo man einigermaßen uneingeschränkt Offroad fahren kann. Das ist einfach ja, ein um so vielfach intensiveres Erlebnis, als auf der Straße unterwegs zu sein, zumindest für mich oder für uns. Aber Gregor, du hast am Anfang gesagt, sowas wie, dass wir uns Offroad wieder zum Affen machen werden, so in Anlehnung an unsere Bosnien-Geschichte vor einem Jahr bei der Sika Raid. Aber ich muss da ehrlich gesagt gestehen, ich hoffe, es ist jetzt nicht anmaßend, aber ich glaube nicht, dass wir uns so schlecht angestellt haben. Also, ich meine, ja, Gregor fängt gerade zum Lachen an, weil er vielleicht an seine unglaublich talentierte Umdrehaktion mit der Gasgas denken muss. Aber nein, abgesehen davon, und sowas passiert auch noch den allergrößten Profis übrigens, ich glaube, wir können uns nicht mehr als Einsteiger bezeichnen. Ich glaube, wir müssen jetzt echt so wie wir es eh schon bewusst gemacht haben, wir haben uns den Titel des durchschnittlichen Offroad-Fahrers, glaube ich, schon langsam verdient. Jawohl. Jawohl!
Enduro riding has also cost energy, but our tour isn't quite over yet.
Man merkt, ich habe es montiert, weil das so gut funktioniert. Na geh! Unfehlbar. Perfekt.
Steppert.
Schau,
War das vielleicht eine sinnvolle Tune-Up-Maßnahme? Kann das sein?
meine Tenere strotzt von sinnvollen Umbaumaßnahmen. Vor allem
Ein großer Kontrast zum Fahrer. Eine sinnlose Erscheinung.
Schauen wir, dass wir zurückkommen. Ha?
Now we've really reached the end of the road, so to say. There was still a short section of highway, and we thought it would be perfect to summarize a bit and discuss the long distance capability. And to summarize, our expectations were not fulfilled because we naturally thought about how we could build up the story. And for me, it was quite clear that the contrast would be that the gas is absolutely outstanding off-road. After all, a difference of more than 50 kilos is a lot, especially where every kilo counts. And in contrast, I expected the Tenere to be the superior bike on the road and highway, but it didn't turn out that way.
The contrasts were much less than expected, so it's a surprise how well they both fish in each other's territory, actually.
Yes, it was off-road for real. The Tenere did really well. It was only when it got very technical and steep that you might run out of place at the front. There,
Sorry
finally,
to interrupt you. We can make a strong statement here. You, especially because you've ridden the other touring enduros, all of them are missing the Touareg 660. But I think we can say that the Tenere 700 off-road is still unbeaten as a touring enduro.
It's just not a complete revelation now. There are enough videos that also points to the rear. Even now, if a lot of people or some people are thinking, yes, that's unfair. It's got expensive Öhlins suspension in it, and it's clear that it performs really well because it must do some good. Yes, it's really good. We've already explained that. But we rode Dad's Tenere and it's completely standard. Even today on the supposedly easier section, there were still a few tough sections that came up unexpectedly. A few special stages. And he was there too, and although he doesn't have much experience with touring enduro bikes, he bounced over them really well on the standard Tenere, even over the rough parts. So you can just tell, even in standard condition, that it can do it. And accordingly, I would say it represented the touring enduro bikes brilliantly. Of course, there are huge differences. Touring enduro bikes is actually a huge segment. It's almost impossible to generalize.
As an average rider, as we can now officially call ourselves, the Tenere 700 off-road is definitely the best there is, still is.
And between touring enduro and touring sport, the difference between off-road isn't that big after all. And now we come to the long distance enduro and the road. That's where you stopped after the road part.
As we've said it now, that ended up being a big surprise, because I have to say that the gas is more than capable on asphalt, and also in the longer term. I mean, I have to lower my judgment a bit now, because we did a lot of off-road riding and not so much on the road. In other words, I don't know what it's like, what it feels like to ride on the road all day. It's possible that the hardness of the seat, the lack of wind protection, and the single cylinder vibrations might get on my nerves. But the way the thing is designed in mixed operation, as we used it, it does a great job. And above all, it's amazingly good on the road. I was able to drive the last part on the highway without any problems, even with this tires, that is with the supposedly studded tires, 140 kilometers per hour, because you have so much freedom of movement on the seat. You can slide quite far back and then you can lean forward. It's almost like sitting on a super sport in terms of your upper body. And that means the wind catches you entirely. You have zero pressure on your hands. And wind protection is, yes, I say, better no wind protection than a bad wind protection that somehow blows the wind into my face. It's not an issue for me either. I know this from naked bikes without wind protection. Personally, I can easily ride for an hour and a half on the highway at a reasonable speed. And it's the same with the gas. Once again, there is the solid KTM suspension. It shows again what it can do. As I said, 140 and 0 signs of instability. Now that really was a big surprise for me. I thought it was going to be horrible. And in the end, I was the one who kept pushing and always stepped on the gas a bit. I said, it's possible, it's possible, it's possible.
Yes, I have to say I was almost a bit disappointed that I didn't see you struggling in the wind, but it actually looked very relaxed anyway.
I can interject right away. Where you might not have been so disappointed was then what will certainly be a problem in the long run is the bench seat, because it's incredibly basic. And towards the end, I got a bit more creative with my riding position anyway, in order to shift the pain to other places and the pressure points to other places.
It was looking great though. Although the gas was now surprisingly suitable for long distances, and at the same time the off-road gap was surprisingly small for us, although there are of course still advantages and disadvantages in certain areas. As we have already explained, we obviously want to do a tune-up now, and that was actually the point. We also wanted to know this difference, but this is now also the official kickoff, so to speak, of our tune-up with the gas ES 700. In other words, even though it has now done amazingly well, we want to know what really works. So we want to offer all the commenters an opportunity, so to speak, or see if they are right. Is it even possible to create a vehicle that is extremely off-road capable, but also suitable for long distances, which weighs no more than 170 or 180 kilograms? In other words, significantly below the lightest touring enduro bikes currently on the market. And that's what we're going to do. And you can expect things like a rally tower body for more wind protection, a luggage solution for the somewhat Spartan rear, perhaps a softer seat. It will be exciting, so subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss anything. And if you like this video, just give us a thumbs up. Also give our nice guide a thumbs up. Let us know in the comments what you liked. Is there anything else to mention?
Yes, I wasn't finished yet.
Well, sorry, you should have cut in.
But I'll keep it very short now. When it comes to the road, I would also like to mention positively that this is an incredible single cylinder. On the one hand, incredibly potent, incredibly powerful off-road, a force, but civilized at the same time to a degree that you would almost think impossible. So you can select fourth, sometimes even fifth gear in local areas if you want to go a little more straight ahead. You have single cylinder vibrations, but that's within tolerable limits. And the quick shifter, I mean a quick shifter with a blipper on a single cylinder, that's completely crazy. It works in every situation. So with everything else we've experienced today, riding through local areas, yes, we said it was great anyway. but I wanted to emphasize that again, or rather I didn't want it to be forgotten now. That also helped to create a really incredibly positive impression today, and that's why the standards for the tune-up are relatively high, because it's pretty good, I have to say, but I'm sure that you can really improve, especially in terms of comfort, with wind protection and perhaps a seat, or I don't know what else is coming. But I'm sure there's a lot of catching up to do, especially with the suspension, in my opinion. I'm curious to see what comes next.
I'm sure we'll give it a worthy upgrade, and if you want even more impressions, even more details just about the Gas ES 700 Enduro, we've also recorded an individual test. Check it out. If you've already subscribed to the channel now, hopefully, as my earlier call urged you to do.
Dann
If
schreibt
you're
uns
still
einen
here
Kommentar
now,
und
then
beweist,
write
dass
us a
ihr
comment and prove that you're
Hardcore
real 1000 fans.
Gut,
Alright,
bist du
are
jetzt
you done
fertig?
now?
Jetzt bin ich
Done.
fertig.
Ich bin
I'm
auch
done too.
fertig, ich
I
will ein
want a
Bier
beer.
haben.
Make it a
Macht
good
es
one.
gut.
Thanks for
Danke
watching
fürs Zuschauen.
and see you next
Bis zum
time.
nächsten Mal.
Cheers
Pfiat
and
euch
na
und
svidania.
na svidania.
Schauen wir, ob es gelaufen ist.